Longtime MMA media outlet Bloody Elbow just got taken over by new owners, and all of their work over the last 17 or so years has been deleted. This is a big deal in the MMA media space. This is the biggest story in the media space right now. And this video is about if the UFC had anything to do with this, because the timing is very interesting. My name is James Lynch. So Awful Announcing has picked up this story, but let's first talk about what Bloody Elbow is. If you guys know, they are sort of an alternative outlet. They're the only outlet, frankly, that's been doing any sort of investigative journalism in the space. And look, I know there's people watching this video who don't like Bloody Elbow. There's a lot of people who are happy to see all of this happen. But the fact of the matter is there was no one else covering the sport the way that Bloody Elbow was. And some of the stuff that they did was honestly very impactful in the sport, whether it was the antitrust lawsuit, whether it was Kadyrov's ties to certain UFC fighters. These are things that went beyond the sport and things that frankly weren't covered, because let's be honest here, the media for the most part in MMA, and I'm in this bunch as well. I mean, I do more interviews, but a lot of it is just the run-of-the-mill fight stuff. But actual serious issues, things that you see being covered in other sports, that was Bloody Elbow, and that's what they were doing over the last 17 or so years. They were very much known for investigative journalism and everything else. So all that work is completely gone. Like, I couldn't imagine my YouTube channel, you know, being deleted. That's kind of the equivalent of what this is, having all my content gone, all the work I've done for years gone. So the new owners have come in and deleted all the media. Why have they done this? Well, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But like I said, I wanted to sort of set the stage here for what Bloody Elbow is. And look, I'll be honest, I didn't agree with everything that Bloody Elbow did when it comes to some of their coverage. Some of the stuff I thought was a bit nitpicky when it came to talking about certain athletes or things that they had done in the past and all that. But some of the work they did as well, very good work. Like I said, especially when it comes to like the antitrust lawsuit with the UFC and everything else. But let's talk about how this all snowballed. So Trent Drinesmith, who I don't know if he still works for Bloody Elbow, but he did. He sort of picked up wind that the articles were deleted. He said, right now it looks as if the folks that are in charge of Bloody Elbow, GRV Media, have deleted the site's stories on the info gathered on the antitrust lawsuit. The below link is dead. And people started noticing that, past articles had been deleted. Then Aaron Bronstetter did a great job sort of summarizing this in a tweet. He says, GRV Media has purchased Bloody Elbow and announced that none of the current staff will be retained. So that's the other thing. They had a lot of staff under that were, sort of making a living working for Bloody Elbow. Now, things had changed over the last year. If you remember Vox Media, who owns MMA Fighting, they also owned Bloody Elbow, but decided to sort of cease operations with Bloody Elbow. So Nate Wilcox, who runs the site, was sort of funding the site itself. That's my understanding anyways. I might be wrong about that, but obviously Kid Nate, as you can see here, was running the site. They were doing the Substack and they were finding other ways to make revenue. So Kid Nate then announcing via the Bloody Elbow newsletter that they will continue covering MMA with some of the previous staff under the new name via Substack. So they have to use a new name, and obviously not going to have the same staff that they had previously, because a lot of them were getting, making a living off that. So they are still continuing, but the big thing here is that the work is lost, and that's pretty crazy. And Luke Thomas, I don't agree with him very much, but I think he summarized this very well, just sort of talking about, how Bloody Elbow being lost in the MMA space as big as it was, it's tough to see, because again, there was no other media outlets out there that were doing actual journalism. And when I mean journalism, I mean like actual stories, right? Like when it comes to investigating stuff. And I mentioned some of the things there with the antitrust lawsuit, Kadyrov, all that stuff. That's what, they were sort of known for. So I actually do agree with Luke here that it is a loss there, because you look at all the other sites, and nothing against them, because that's, again, this is what fans want to read and want to consume as far as their content. It's just typical fight week stuff. This fighter said this fighter's training for this fight, etc. They were actually sort of going outside the bubble and looking at some of the bigger issues. So it is a loss. Like I said, I don't agree with everything that Bloody Elbow did. Some of the stuff, like I said, I didn't agree with, but you can't deny that they were needed in the space, because you have to have people being held accountable. And Luke sort of summarizes this here as well, where, if you have outlets that have ties to the UFC, like just as a quick example, ESPN's not going to ask any tough questions of Dana White. They're a TV partner. Dana White doesn't want any bad press at all. So that's why you're not going to see Brett Okamoto or some of these other reporters that work for ESPN really press Dana on fighter pay or anything like that. It's just not going to happen. Don't you guys want to know the truth? Don't you want to know what's going on behind the scenes? This is where a Bloody Elbow is very much needed there. So just wanted to set the stage for what Bloody Elbow was. But again, Awful Announcing is the only site I've seen sort of pick up on this, because it is a big deal in the media space. This would be the equivalent of like, I don't know, like a big, NFL site or NFL blog, like going out of business and having all their work deleted. That's sort of the equivalent of that. But here's the interesting thing, and this is going to be something that I'll let you guys decide on this, but the timing of this is interesting. So right now, the UFC is in a court battle right now with this antitrust lawsuit. If you guys don't know what this is all about, if you go on my other channel, or actually, I'll probably just link it in the description of this video. Eric McGracken, who's done some great work on the antitrust lawsuit, basically summarizes what's going on with the UFC right now. They're basically in court. Now, wouldn't it be in the best interest of the UFC to not have any bad press out there? Well, Bloody Elbow was sort of the only outlet that was in the media space, in the MMA media space, that was actually holding the UFC accountable for things that were happening. If that all goes away, does that not make the UFC look better? And I know that was honestly my first thought when I heard about all this. Like, does this GRV media have anything to do with the UFC? Like, I do wonder that. And, you know, the owner, Nate Wilcox, came out and said, because someone says the UFC potentially using stealth tactics by funding a relatively small media company to purchase Bloody Elbow and instantly pulling all the financial and antitrust articles from the site is so effing crazy, dictator behavior. Nate says, I don't have any reason to believe this is true. Well, to play devil's advocate here, Nate's not going to come out and say, oh yeah, we knew about this. And, you know, like, because at the end of the day, Nate's just trying to sell his site, right? So I don't think he would ever come on here and admit and be like, oh yeah, they did have ties to the UFC, but I didn't think they'd delete it. Like, obviously he's not going to say that, you know what I mean? So, and I'm not throwing Nate under the bus here. Like, you know, listen, I do enough business in the work that I'm doing. You got to make money. You got to feed your family. Like, I don't fault him for trying to, you know, sell off the site or anything. Maybe he didn't know they were going to delete anything. I don't know the truth there, but I think there's something to this. I really do. You got the antitrust lawsuit coming out. If you go on Google right now and you Google stuff, you know, negative stuff about the UFC, Bloody Elbow is going to have the majority of the stuff there when it comes to their content and their articles and stuff. There's also this thing about the owner of GRV as well. Again, I'm just throwing this out here and letting you guys decide here. I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but it says the new head of fake Bloody Elbow, GRV Media head of combat sports is Tom Lewican. Seems 100% real. Has anyone interacted with him on social media? Like, apparently they're saying there's like no social media footprint of this guy is what they're saying. So again, you guys investigate yourself and see what you think. I think it's interesting. Like, again, even before all this stuff came out that I'm showing you here, that was kind of what I thought. Like, wouldn't it be in the UFC's best interest to get rid of any sort of bad press here? So that's what I find a bit interesting. And they even alluded to in this awful announcing article, right? Like, these aren't just conspiracy theories that are out on social media. Look at it here. They reference it in the article. This really sucks. Bloody Elbow's content on the UFC antitrust lawsuits and several other journalistic works have been deleted, removed. Where is it here though? What am I looking for? Yeah, the UFC goes to trial for their antitrust lawsuit next month, where they're going to be sued by more than 1,200 former fighters. Bloody Elbow gets sold and everyone is laid off years after investigative research on the subject. This isn't a coincidence. This is shady as it gets. Right? So maybe the UFC's playing the long game here. We'll see. We'll see, right? So, and they referenced the post I just had there as well. Like, again, people don't want bad press out there. And we've seen this before where people are going around and silencing things. So, I mean, you guys decide here. Is the UFC responsible for this? Do they have a hand in it? It certainly benefits the UFC from not having this bad press out there. And I actually wonder if this is something that's going to be brought up in the court case as well. Like, hey, all this stuff got deleted. Are there any ties? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know sort of the ins and outs of it, but I'll just kind of summarize this video by saying that, like I said, when you lose media outlets, it's bad for the sport. And I know the sport's changing. Like, I think it's crazy that people, you know, still want to read a lot of articles and stuff when a lot of stuff now is video and it's on YouTube. And I've talked about this at length on this channel about how, you know, you do see a lot of people consuming content now via YouTube and getting their news that way, as opposed to getting it from traditional media, which is, you know, your major websites, your junkies and fightings and all that. But yeah, it's certainly interesting, some of the stuff that's out there, as far as, you know, all this work being deleted. Again, 15 years, Anton was the managing editor there. All that's gone. And like I said, I know there's people who are going to watch this and going to be happy about this, but you got to admit, like, if you're not having people held accountable for anything, then what are we even doing here? Like, we got to, you know, we really have to understand the scope of the sport. And if there's bad stuff happening, you want to know about it, right? I think people deserve to know the truth of what's actually going on. Otherwise, you're only getting one message, and that's propaganda. That's not, you know, that's nothing else other than that. So I think people have a right to know what's going on here. So we'll see if anything comes out of this, but I think this whole thing is wild. And again, you're not going to see a lot of other channels cover this, because this is something that I sort of specialize in, is talking about the media side of the MMA industry. And, you know, obviously I have my podcast and I talk about it on my live streams and stuff, but this is something worth keeping an eye on. Again, we'll see what the new Bloody Elbow is, this new, you know, sort of name and venture that Nate is going to be doing with the Substack. We'll see what type of stories they can do, but losing a big site like this overall does hurt the sport when it comes to coverage. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. Do you believe these theories that the UFC had something to do with this, with all the work getting deleted? What are your thoughts on Bloody Elbow? I want to hear from you. Again, if you're just going to come on here and say they suck, I'm glad it happened. not really looking for that, but I just want to know, like, what are some things you like, what you didn't like. Let's have a discussion about this, because I do think this is the biggest story right now in MMA media. Follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, @Lynch on Sports. I'm James Lynch. If there's any other video ideas, any other topics you want me to tackle in videos, I'm always open to suggestion here. So you guys just let me know in the comments if there's anything else you want me to talk about. My name is James Lynch. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.